Looks like it's about time for some more discourse about what's going on with the Bengals' right tackle position, plus some philosophical questions about, well, how should the Bengals prioritize their money with Joe Burrow, superstar quarterback? We'll get into that and more in today's episode.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. You can subscribe to this show on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast. Become an everydayer so you don't miss out when we have great content coming for you this offseason, or had some great film reviews last week, for example, and become a first listener. Join that first listen club with the many other Bengals fans that make us their first listen every day. And James, today, it's time for a good old-fashioned Locked On Bengals mailbag. And we've got a bunch of questions to get to today, as we always do. And if you want to submit your questions for the future, make sure you're following at Locked On Bengals on Twitter, because that's where we look to compile our questions every time we do this exercise. And we're going to start with the right tackle conversation. James really picked up on social media over the last 24 hours or so, at least as far as I can tell. And Tasha B asked, at Tasha B 808 on Twitter, are there any insights from coaches, or what does your eye test or practices say about Jackson Carman potentially looking good at right tackle? And is a Jonah Williams trade still plausible, with La'el Collins looking good on Instagram? So really, this question gives us all we need to talk about to get into the right tackle conversation on the whole.
It's a good starting point, right? And let's start right with the guy who's lining up at right tackle, Jackson Carman. Eye test wise, best shape I've seen him in. And, much like, we talked about Joe Burrow, I think Jamar Chase showed up in tremendous shape. Tee Higgins, this is the best shape Jackson Carman's been in. Here's the problem, is they're limited to what they can do. And even in training camp, when they can wear helmets and wear shells and eventually pads, you don't really get a huge you don't get to answer a ton of questions when it comes to offensive line play. And so right now, I can't say Jonah Williams is having a good offseason program. I think he passes the eye test because he looks like he's in good shape. Or Jackson Carman, excuse me, Jackson Carman. But it's a perfect example. Outside of just being able to look at Jonah Williams, there's no reason to think that Jonah Williams isn't doing everything that Jackson's doing, that these other linemen are doing, and he's just doing it on his own. And I think that's the part with Carman where, yes, he's the one that's available. And so he's lining up at right tackle. I also think he's third in the pecking order right now for that starting right tackle job. The Bengals aren't going to come out and say that, because he might end up being their starting right tackle, depending on what happens. Let's keep it moving then. A Jonah Williams trade. I think it's as unlikely as it's been, but I wouldn't rule it out. What if La'el Collins does continue to improve and shows them that he is going to be ready for week one and is going to be able to be the guy that they hoped he would be when they signed him last year and flashed at times last year? If he shows them that, and then a team calls and gives the Bengals something of value for Jonah, and I think that's the problem. They weren't getting anything of value. A 6th-round pick doesn't do anything. They wanted value for Jonah Williams. It hasn't come yet, and so that's why he's still on the team. I don't think they're shopping him, but I don't think they would ignore phone calls either and send him to voicemail. I think they'll pick up the phone. So a trade could always happen. But what's going to be interesting is when minicamp starts. I think Jonah's going to report. That's what I've been told. And so if he does report, who lines up as that starter? Is it Jackson? Is it Jonah? And how comfortable is Jonah at right tackle? Has he been working and going through the footwork and the hand motion, all of those things, the technique that comes with moving from left tackle to right tackle? If so, I think he'll be the guy that lines up there until La'el's healthy. And if La'el's healthy, then it gets a really interesting conversation. But we could also have the contract conversation. There's just a lot to it. And Jonah there's no flexibility in his contract, and that's what makes it tough, I think, if you're the Bengals.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, is he's going to be on the team unless he's traded, and he's going to be making $12.5 million. And the only way he's not on the Bengals is if, like you said, somebody offers something that the Bengals feel makes them better than Jonah Williams' presence on their team does this year. And there are a number of points that have been made about Jonah, right? In terms of skepticism about his ability to play right tackle at a high level. One of them is he's not played right tackle before in the NFL. Well, one, neither is Jackson Carman. Two, at least he's ever played right tackle in his life. He played his freshman year at Alabama at right tackle, played really well, won numerous Offensive Player of the Week awards, both from the Alabama staff and from the SEC, won a Freshman of the Week award in the SEC as well, I believe, as a freshman, true freshman, starting at right tackle in Alabama. So it's not like he was bad when he had the opportunity to do it before. And then, the concerns about his health, well, okay, there's also major concerns about La'el's health right now. And I know he looks good on Instagram, and it's great that you're seeing that. And I don't mean to take anything away from his recovery. That's fantastic. But LC also has to prove he can stay healthy, right? Sure. And so when you start to bring up these questions and poke holes in Jonah, you can start poking holes in some of these other candidates for that job as well. On the other hand, I think Jonah is a high-quality player. People knew that I was very bullish on Jonah last year going into the season, and I was pretty disappointed with his season. Mm-hmm. And I've also talked about, he had a few extraordinarily bad games. Cleveland, twice in particular, stand out as just atrocious games in pass blocking, and people like to bring up his sack allowed number. Outside of that, I really don't think Jonah was a bad pass blocker for most of the year. He had spots where he wasn't great, and he had some really bad individual losses, but on the balance of his play, he was still a pretty good pass blocker most of the time. It was just injuries caught up to him by the end of the season, as it happens. And he had a couple awful performances against Myles Garrett. And that'll also happen.
Yeah.
And so like your options are Jonah Williams, who has a pedigree, moving to right tackle and hoping that he bounces back to be the player that he was before last year. La'el Collins, hoping that he bounces back to be the player that he was before last year, which was by far the worst year of his career, right? And had the most health struggles of his career, battling through them, and didn't take him off the field, but then he had the ACL at the end of the year. And so you have those two options, or you have the totally unproven, you've never seen him play right tackle in the NFL, you've never seen him play right tackle in college, Jackson Carman, who's trying to find his way out of the doghouse and into a starting job and trying to salvage the end of his rookie contract. Those are the Bengals' options right now. And in terms of who's healthy, it's got to be Jonah with the first team to start. And if a competition brews from there because Jonah's awful there and he's totally forgotten how to play right tackle, and they believe in Jackson Carman, great. The best player should win the job. But right now, LC isn't healthy. And so it's Jackson Carman and Jonah Williams for minicamp, we think. And from what we've heard, I would think Jonah Williams is the first one to get the shot with the first team.
Couple things. One, I don't care what Jonah did at Alabama. Throw that out. There's a reason everybody's talked about how everybody, Dave Lapham, people within the organization, every single combine, it's been brought up. Would you consider moving Jonah to right tackle? Would you consider moving Jonah inside? Would you consider moving Jonah? It's because he's versatile. It's that simple. Nick Saban on the two on the documentary with him and Bill Belichick on HBO, literally talking to Bill Belichick, it was captured. He can play anywhere, all 5 spots. That's what Nick Saban said coming out of the draft. So it's not far-fetched. And Frank Pollock, by the way, praised Jonah and believes he can move over to right tackle. I think that's part of it. So that's one thing. The other is so you have unproven right tackle Jonah Williams, young Jackson Carman, who has been very underwhelming since being the 46th pick in the draft. And we'll see. Maybe he does end up being the starting right tackle. And a guy in La'el Collins who, if healthy, and he didn't have that ACL, I just think he would probably be the right tackle. Mm-hmm. But now you have the ACL and you have everything that went into getting him ready for game day last year, which was a lot. He didn't practice at all last year. And I'm not saying that's not the way to go, because if it keeps Joe Burrow upright and he's good in the run game and is the player that he can be. So there's all these things. And so when I look at it, just let it play out. Jonah Williams is the favorite because he is the guy that, when healthy, has played best most recently. When healthy, he didn't have a suspension in 2021 like La'el. He didn't have, he had an injury-riddled season last year. So did La'el, and he's not coming off of nearly as significant of an injury. And he's 25. And so when you mix all of those things in, I think that makes him the favorite, plus his contract, which matters too. That said, would it shock me if La'el Collins found a way out there and made this a real competition? No. Would it shock me if Jackson Carman did? Yes, because this is the same Jackson Carman that has lost back-to-back training camp battles. And I know it was at guard, but that still matters. Lost back-to-back training camp battles, one against a guy that is no longer in the league, and the other against a fourth-round rookie from North Dakota State. And I like Cordell Volson a lot, but there's no reason why Jackson Carman should have lost that camp battle last year, and he did. So we'll see. But miss me with Jackson should start because he played pretty well against the Bills. I think he was solid against the Bills, but that was one game.
It will be a bit of a competition. That's for sure. The best player should win. I think we can all agree there. Whoever wins the competition should win the competition. And that's the decision the coaches will make as they watch it play out in training camp. Coming up next, we're going to talk about how the Bengals should allocate their resources, knowing that they have a mega deal coming for elite quarterback Joe Burrow, and more of your questions. We'll go there next.
Today's episode of Locked On Bengals is brought to you by FanDuel. And the NBA Finals are here. And whether you're all in on Jimmy Butler and the Heat, maybe you think Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets are going to get it done and win their first championship in team history, well, you have to get to FanDuel right now, because new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. It's the perfect time to take advantage of this offer because, well, FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. And whether you're betting the money line, whether you want to take the over on Jimmy Butler points, the under on the Denver Nuggets, you can tell where my loyalty lies. I'm just kidding. Of course, Nikola Jokic is a beast, back-to-back MVP, and has a chance to become the NBA Finals MVP. So if you want to wager on that or anything else, NBA Finals, Major League Baseball, you need to get to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon and get your no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
James XO at CincyBoy23 has a bit of a philosophical question.
Mm-hmm.
If Joe Burrow is a true superstar quarterback, we think he is, and I'll edit this to say we know he is.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better if they took that Tee Higgins extension money and just put it in the defense instead and let Joe Burrow elevate receivers like Tom Brady did?
Well, there's a big reason why Tom Brady left. Let's start there. The reason he left New England, a big reason, was because he was surrounded by guys my size trying to catch passes, and he got sick of it, and he wanted to throw to a tree like Mike Evans and have a reliable slot like Chris Godwin, and also added Antonio Brown, which worked for a year. And we could go on and on about the receivers and weapons he had there. Obviously, Gronk as well. Weapons are the league now. So if you're going to sell me on getting rid of, what I think the Bengals view as their 1A receiver, you can, because Joe Burrow is a superstar and Jamar Chase is better than Tee Higgins. And I'm not sure it's necessarily close, even though I do think T can be a 1 in this league on other teams. So you can sell me on that idea, but here's where it falls short, because it's hard to find good players at any position. So to say, oh, well, I'm going to throw that at defense. Well, it sounds good. Well, which veteran are you spending that money on? Are you sure that that veteran is going to have the impact that Tee Higgins has? Are we sure that the Bengals are going to be able to replace Tee Higgins with a quality receiver? Because you still need quality. You might not need superstar level or star level, and I think Tee is a star, but you need something like that. It's hard for me to say subtract this really, really good player and go find another really, really good player because you want to structure the team a certain way, especially because this offense is as reliant on 3 receivers as any offense in the NFL. So to me, no, I would keep T. Could you sell me on the philosophy? You could, but you better get it right, because we know Tee Higgins is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you sign a player on defense that's been really productive in this league and is going into a second contract, and you just think, oh, he'll be a perfect fit. Well, maybe he won't. Maybe things will change. Maybe it doesn't work out. I know Tee Higgins works here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, it would have to be like a specific player, right? Like who would the player be that you would invest to say 20 million, 25 million, whatever Tee Higgins is going to make in 2024? And where my brain goes is it immediately goes to like elite edge rusher, second contract elite edge rusher. So Chase Young has a major comeback year this year, and he's suddenly a free agent, and you think you can get Chase Young on your team. All right, maybe that makes sense, right? You can get some player like that. Nick Bosa stays healthy, continues the career trend he's on. Josh Allen, edge rusher, stays healthy, has a productive year, has a breakout year, a really good year. Those are the kind of players where you could try to make an argument and say, okay, well, you could get a Von Bell style player, Khalil Mack level player on your defense. But like you said, James, this offense is designed around 11 personnel, around having really good outside receivers. And would they be able to survive without Tee Higgins? We've seen that they can survive without one of those guys. But we've also seen the efficiency of the offense at various times diminish when they lose one of their 3 receivers. And you know, the comparison to Tom Brady thrown in there, it's not like Brady didn't have weapons. 1, different era of football. 2, his best year when they went 16-0 in the regular season. I know they didn't win the Super Bowl. It turns out it's hard to win the Super Bowl every year, even when you are a really, really dominant team. That was a Randy Moss year, right? The insane 50 touchdown, 23 Randy Moss touchdown year. And then
Wes
after
Welker.
that, yeah, and Wes Welker, who later had an all-pro year when Gronk had an all-pro year. And then the Patriots went a different direction, right? Like they went to the 12 personnel, the Aaron Hernandez, yeah, was blanking a little bit. Rob Gronkowski, 2 tight ends, Wes Welker, all pro years in there. It's not like they didn't have guys for Brady. It was just a different philosophy, a different offensive style, a different era of football. And then when Brady won in Tampa, of course, they had guys again at receiver. Like he had dudes at receiver. The Bengals designed to have dudes at receiver.
Yeah.
And so it would take a major offensive philosophical change, I think, or just continuing to hit in the draft, which have been really good at hitting in the draft to wide receiver. But that's a big gamble, right? And so there's all these unknown factors where you know Tee Higgins fits, you know he's good, you know he works in the offense, which it's one of those things where maybe you could argue we're being resistant to change, but also you know it works and you know it's gotten them very far. And so it seems like something that you wouldn't want to risk.
I'll just give you an example. Chase Young could have 2,000 sacks this year, and there's no way I would sign him over re-signing Tee Higgins. 2,000.
2,000?
2,000. I wouldn't. No. A ton of injuries, hasn't been productive throughout his career. Oh, wow. His 5th-year option gets turned down, and he plays well for 1 season. That is such a huge – that's a perfect example. Because it'd be like, oh, yeah, Chase Young, he's coming here, and the pass rush is going to be nasty. Like, I could already feel it. I get it. I would rather have Tee Higgins. I can't believe that's a take, but I'm just planting the flag now. And really, regardless,
is a lot of sacks. There aren't even that many snaps in a season. He
could have 2,000 sacks. I promise you I would not. Like, no matter what Chase Young does, I would rather have Tee Higgins over, even including if I'm Washington, which is probably why they're entertaining trading him. But yeah, outside of like this dynamic level player, and we haven't seen the best of Tee Higgins yet. I think that's the other part of this. And that's why there are going to be teams. I think the Jaguars are going to get in. If he becomes a free agent, they'll try to pay him big money and reunite him with Trevor Lawrence. I think there'll be a lot of teams that go after Tee Higgins. And that's why you can't let him hit the market. And whether you re-sign him or you tag him next offseason and do it that way. I will say this just on T's future. It cannot end up like Jesse Bates.
Mhm.
Like, I would not be okay with that, where you just let him play it out and that's it. Like, next year, if you realize that something's not going to happen and you tag him and you go up to that deadline and it's still not happening, I want some assets for him because he's worth much more than a third-round compensatory pick. And this way you're not hamstrung to what you sign or don't sign in free agency from a compensatory part of it. And
Especially at wide receiver. Wide receiver just so much more valuable right now.
no doubt.
For
I mean,
a
he's
guy
worth a
like
1
T.
plus. He's worth a 1
I think
plus.
so. Yeah.
And he would be if you tagged him, by the way. He still would be, assuming he has a good year this year, which I think he will. So, yeah, that's where we are on T. We have a ton more questions to get to, 2 and 2 segments, but those were some long form ones. We'll do some rapid fire coming up next.
You've got a fun one to start segment 3, James. This is tapping into your knowledge about the Cincinnati Bengals players' other sport, multi-sport history. Cincy James at Cincy James 83. Who hits a home run in batting practice first between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase? And is there anyone else who you think would win that sort of contest on the roster? Because I think there are some pretty good candidates on a team full of freak athletes.
Joe Burrow would beat Jamar Chase and hit a home run. Joe Burrow, I believe. So that answers that part. Other guys that could absolutely rake. This is a fun one because I wonder how many of these guys, played baseball. And I would name a couple. I think Irv Smith Jr. would be a guy that played multiple sports and could do that. I think, and you mentioned, some of these linemen. I'm thinking, let's just say offensive linemen. I think Orlando Brown Jr. would crush the ball.
He's so big. There's so much force.
I think he would crush the ball. And I know he didn't test well athletically. Well, that's because he's big. He's a great athlete for his size. I think that's fair to say because there aren't guys that big. And so in baseball, I think he would be one I would roll with. Other guys that I'm just kind of thinking here. I wonder if Drew Chrisman would be pretty good. I'm just thinking like really outside the box about guys that people wouldn't think about. I think Tyler Boyd would be good. In all of these guys, Jamar Chase would be as well, especially if you give them some reps. Who else would be sneaky good? Brad Robbins. I bet Brad Robbins would be a good baseball player.
Brad Robbins has the baseball facial. Man, every time Brad Robbins comes up, it's a mustache. Gets me every time.
Your face lights up. Oh, you know the other one?
Miles Murphy.
I was going to say Juan Drago. That dude is going to be Ricky Henderson. He's going to
inside the Parker.
Just first to third on a single. He's going to turn singles into doubles.
In batting practice. Inside the park home run in batting practice. Let's go.
There we go.
But my brain immediately went to the freak athletes on the defensive line. Like Miles Murphy being a just absolute freak. And when you're that big, plus you're that athletic, the amount of quick twitch force you're going to be able to get into a baseball swing, you hit one the right way, you're going to hit it a long, long way. So like guys like Miles Murphy, who you said you think he played baseball, right?
I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Miles Murphy played baseball.
And like guys like Trey Henderson and Sam Hubbard, like those really big guys that have the quick twitch to them, I could see all of them doing. And DJ Reader, of course, played. He pitched, but
sure,
the dude's a monster.
I'm pretty sure Murphy. I know he played baseball. Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure he said he threw 90 miles per hour at one point. Like that's just freak stuff, right? Yeah. That's unbelievable. Who else would be? Joe Mixon would be good. He's a freak athlete.
You would think. I mean, most guys that are big, athletic, strong, and twitchy should be able to hit home runs given enough like repetition, right?
Andre Yosavash would be interesting.
Yeah, Olympic level athlete, sure.
Perfect center fielder, like 6'2", can cover so much ground. Yeah. Whew. Let's field a baseball team.
Just caught with baseball fever, huh?
Not really. It's a football town.
Yeah.
Anyways, but well, it depends on where we want to go. I'm going to go to Jared. Do you expect the defensive line to rank higher in sacks pressures this year compared to last year? And do you have any concerns about the depth on the defensive line, specifically the interior?
Yeah, back to a bit of a serious football question here. I think the interior defensive line we talked about a lot, where they could add a piece there. I thought that would be the direction they would go as far as adding a piece in the draft. If they were going to add a defensive lineman and they went the edge route instead. I think though, and Lou Anarumo talked about this, I think with Mike Hilton and Kelsey Conway, when you have a bunch of dudes at edge, you can put them on the interior too in some situations to get them all out there together. And we've talked about that NASCAR package, talked about that immediately when Miles Murphy was picked. Lou talked about it too. He's thinking about it. They're thinking about those packages. So I think there's certainly a path to being more consistent in closing out sacks. I think they were pretty good in terms of pressuring the quarterback last year. I don't think that was really an issue. It was really the conversion rate. They left some sacks on the field. So there could be some regression there in a positive way, like regression toward finishing more sacks. You could certainly see that. Wouldn't surprise me, though, if they're looking to add something on the interior. That being said, the world where they don't do that is a world where they feel really good about putting extra edge guys on the field, like Lou's talked about, like we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think – and there was another question. Let me shout out who it was. Alex Zabonik, at Zabonik Alex on Twitter. Biggest concern area on the team. I think you could say interior defensive line is that, just because there's some question marks there and who will it be. You could go a few other areas, but there aren't many. And so I think it's a bit nitpicky to look at any unit, really. I mean, heck, they have 2 punters competing. And I know we expect it to go one way, but we just led the show by talking about 3 right tackles. And 3 options that at least 2 of the 3 feel pretty decent, if healthy, I would say, regardless of how you feel about the order. Like, they're pretty deep at a lot of spots. So could they add someone? Maybe. I think they're done spending on the defensive line, though. They have a lot of money there, man. A lot of money. And so we'll see. But there aren't many concerns with this team, and they have pretty good depth.
Just on that note, the Bengals are spending the 6th most money on the edge rushing position in the NFL this year. And that includes a first-round pick who's not getting paid a ton, but is a first-round pick. And on the interior defensive line, I think it's like 10th most. On the defensive line combined, then you can imagine that number ranks pretty highly. A fun one, James, for our next question from Bullet Smasher at Bullet Smasher 1. Over under 0.5 Hall of Famers on the current Cincinnati Bengals roster. So projecting out into the future, is there at least 1 Hall of Famer on this roster, James?
Yeah, I think there's 2. And Hall of Fame is, put it like this, the Bengals have 2 Hall of Famers total. None of their quarterbacks are in, none of their receivers. And they've had good quarterback play throughout their history, and they've had really good receiver play. And yet, are you telling me that Joe Burrow isn't going to end up in the Hall of Fame? Like, if I had to bet, I wouldn't bet against him. Not on the trajectory he's at, because there hasn't been a trajectory for any of the quarterbacks. And I did a project on all of them. Boomer, Ken Anderson, Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer didn't even get on the field as a rookie. Now, that was a mistake looking back, and he should have, but he didn't get on the field as a rookie. Boomer was battling Ken Anderson. Ken Anderson wasn't even the starter necessarily, had to fight for the starting job going into his MVP season. Joe Burrow is on another level. And I think, and that's not necessarily Ken's fault. There's a lot of stuff going on, but context matters. But point is the point. So yes, I would say Joe. And then I think back on draft night, probably more often than I should. And usually it's when he catches a deep ball or is doing a gritty in the end zone. And Jamar says, Dan Hort sits up there and it's like, what do you think about joining an organization with such great receivers? And he named AJ and Chad. I'm going to break every record they have. I was like, in the moment, I was like, I can't believe he said that. And yet here he is doing exactly that on a crazy pace. And so I would say they have 2. I think it's those 2. Could they have more? Maybe. And I'm not here to make people mad. Hall of Fame is really hard to do, right? They have 0 Hall of Famers in my lifetime. 0. And that might continue until Joe or Jamar. But if I had to bet, I would guess I would bet those two.
I think Geno should get in before those two.
I don't think it's as obvious as I've talked to some people across the league, and I get the all-decade team stuff. I don't think it's as obvious as some Bengals people have made it.
It's one of those things where he played for the Bengals. That's going to be held against him. Didn't have the postseason success. It's going to be held against him. I think he's a clear Hall of Famer. Personally, my personal opinion, I'm maybe one of those Bengals people who you are talking about.
I've asked about it. I think Andrew Whitworth is the other one where he helped himself by leaving.
Willie still has a chance. Willie's been potentially building momentum the last couple of years.
In my head, Willie is in. He'll be in. I think he'll be the next one in. But there might not be. I think Andrew probably gets in, but I don't know about Geno. I think it's more of a coin flip than you realize.
I don't think it's a sure thing, but I think he's worthy of it.
Sure.
He was the best at his position, or, in the top two of his position for a very, very long time. Anyway, I'm also taking the over. The way that they don't end up with at least one Hall of Famer on this roster is like things go really, really badly. And it's like a world I'm not even going to speak into existence, because if things go the way we think they're going to go, they have at least one Hall of Famer on this team, right? I mean, that's pretty simple.
Yeah, I think if they get the ring, if they get the MVP, I think Burrow at some point will win an MVP. Like Ken Anderson, if he wins in 1981, wins the Super Bowl,
he's already
probably in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. Boomer
Esiason is in there right now. I mean,
it is in the conversation. He's not even in the Hall of Fame conversation right now, but he would probably be if he had won Super Bowl 23. So it's the same thing. I think part of it is Burrow has had postseason success. He has. Now he hasn't finished it, but my God, he's taken this franchise to new heights. So yeah, I think worst case it's 1. Hopefully it's like 5. Hopefully this is like the golden age where we're talking about Joe, Jamar, T. If you want to say heck, Orlando Brown plays for the next 10 years and is just super elite at left tackle. Hey,
sure.
Take it.
Last one real quick. We did a James question. We got to take a Jake question.
Yeah.
At Jake_duh_rake. Speaking of guys that can rake, if you could use magic to do one mundane task for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Mundane task. Who is it? Laundry?
Might be.
Folding laundry?
Might be.
Cutting the grass? I would just say, I would say, you haven't seen the yard. I would say all of the landscaping, right? All landscaping. Of the outdoor maintenance, stuff like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That one, because it takes time. Laundry stinks, but you could do it while you're watching TV. And people say, oh, well, cutting the grass and doing all that stuff you could do while you're listening to a podcast. By the way, shout out to those that are doing that right now, listening to us. At the same time, it takes a lot of time when you have, and I don't have a giant yard, but it's not small. And so it takes time. So that would be the one.
Yeah, I think I'll go the laundry route, folding and putting away laundry. And I don't know if it's mundane, but working out, if I could use magic to do my workout for me, talk about time-consuming things.
Are you serious? See, I'm the opposite. I need that. I'm like Burrow. I need that mentally.
But you would still get it. It's just that magic would do it for you.
No.
That's fine.
I enjoy it. And that's
I don't dislike it. I've grown to enjoy it actually as I've been doing it. Like I've been very consistent this year, as you know, and like to make fun of me about. But
what?
Look, but that's like 6 hours a week. I think that I could get back. That's pretty good time saving there. Laundry is like once a week.
Sure. And that's why I said laundry, I'm doing all of the yard stuff. I don't always fold every piece of laundry.
If I could use magic on the yard for all the landscaping, all the grass, all that stuff, like take care of restaining the fence every year, all that stuff, like, yeah. That's great.
Yes. That's the part where
in real life,
for sure.
instead of magic, it's just money. So that's your option to do it if you're not doing it yourself. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode.
Mundane
of the
task,
Locked On.
work. Just have someone work for you.
Well, but this is my job, and I like this. I'm not having
That's
magic do this podcast for me.
Or AI.
Nope. Pass.
I
Can't
agreed.
replace us. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. OTAs next week, James. Then we have minicamp. We'll have your coverage of Bengals OTA open to the media next week. Until then, hoo day and have a good one.